Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next installment of GEMA Talks. I'm Rich Batista, thrilled to be with you and thrilled to have with us Brett O'Brien, 1995 graduate of Georgetown and Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer of Frito Lay North America. Brett has had, I'd like to say he's sort of the personification of an experienced, accomplished consumer marketing executive. He has been with Pepsi for over 20 years. Frito Lay is part of Pepsi, had a long stint at Gatorade and the general manager of the Gatorade properties. So we're going to have a really interesting discussion about all the marketing strategies and a lot of the activations that Gatorade did over the air, particularly in sports and music and the like, and obviously his new role at Frito Lay, and also talk about how Brett got into the business. So Brett, thanks for being with us. Love to have you here today.
It's awesome to be here. I love what you've been doing with the GEMA Talks. It's really been cool to follow. So happy to be a part of it.
Terrific. Thank you. You know, I generally like to start these at the beginning or early on in someone's life. So give everyone a little bit of your background, you know, where you're from and sort of how you got to Georgetown.
Yeah. So I grew up just outside of Boston and really wanted to get a different experience in Georgetown. It wasn't really even on my list, and my mom was one of those people who felt like you had to apply to about 27 schools in order to make sure you got into one. And so Georgetown kind of threw up on the list, and I was like, I don't even know if that's an option. I had a cousin who played baseball there years before me, and I just I visited and just man, fell in love with Georgetown, and there's so many great things about that school. So luckily, I somehow convinced them to let me in, and loved spending my time in DC. And the best part about my Georgetown career was I got to I met my wife there, and we've been married ever since Georgetown. So just an awesome opportunity for me and a great thrill to spend time in DC and such a great campus. And
what were some of your activities when you were at Georgetown in terms of maybe internships or jobs and the like?
Yeah, sure. So I had this idea that I would play tennis at Georgetown, and yeah, that didn't happen. So I rode crew for a while, and I loved it. I didn't love waking up at 5 a.m, and it did a job on my back, but I really loved it. So unfortunately, I didn't do that. I only did that for about a year and a half. But I was an English and government major, and I felt like since I was in DC, I should probably take advantage of what that government landscape and what the environment could help me with, and to understand government in a better way. So I interned. I really didn't know all that much about government, but I found an internship at a place called the Heritage Foundation, which was a conservative think tank, and learned a lot, some great, some not so great, but certainly was really understood kind of how that flowed. And then thought I wanted a totally differentiated experience, and was able to work in the Clinton White House the following year, and got an internship there in the Office of President's Personnel. So learned a lot about totally different side of what I engaged with at the Heritage Foundation, and really loved that juxtaposition and loved being a part of it. Yeah. And quite honestly, just loved taking advantage of what DC had to offer. And so, yeah, it was a great 4 years. I ended up staying in Georgetown or in DC after I graduated, because I loved that city so much.
And did you, what sort of was the catalyst for you to go into the sports industry? Maybe discuss kind of what your first job was.
Yeah, sure, for sure. So I talked about how I was a government and English major, and I don't really know what one does with an English major. I know what one does with a government major, and I kind of figured out that that wasn't for me. But I also knew that I wanted to get into marketing, and to me, the number one passion point for which marketing flowed was sports. And so I grew up a massive sports fan. It was one of those things where it was what bonded you to members of your family. Like my dad and I had, he's a traditional South Boston, and he didn't have he didn't talk a ton, but we had this kind of shared experience with the Red Sox and the Celtics and the Patriots, and so those were things that really were meaningful to me growing up. And I knew that sports had that ability to kind of hit that emotional connection in a way that so many other aspects of our life didn't. And so I wanted to get into sports. I didn't really know what that meant other than that I wanted to go work in the sports industry. And so I was able to get an internship with a sports marketing agency right out of college in DC, and it's called Advantage. It's now called Octagon Sports. So worked there for, I guess it was about 4.5 years, and was able to get involved in everything from setting up golf tournaments to working with clients on establishing their own sports partnerships, negotiating with athletes, and kind of helping our athlete pool as well. So awesome opportunity and a great chance for me to stay in DC, but also really immerse myself in the sports industry.
And I think after that, you got your MBA, is that right?
Yeah, I did. I kind of felt like, I was laughing earlier about how I don't even know if this is a policy at Georgetown anymore, but when I went, if you weren't all that interested in math, you could take 2 sciences. And there was a guy named Dr. Spoon who ran the planetarium, and he had these amazing science classes that were about like taking field trips on the Potomac. And so I took full advantage of the Dr. Spoon science classes. I didn't really dabble in the math. And so about 4.5 years out of school, I realized I got to go get a real base in business and really understand economics a lot better. And so I went back to B school here in Chicago and interned at Pepsi between my first and second year, because as I talked about earlier, I knew I wanted to get into marketing, and I really liked this idea of consumer marketing and big brands. And so went that route from there.
And obviously that connection, which is always a good anecdote for people to hear. So that internship that summer obviously propelled you into a job with them, I assume, after business school.
Yeah, it did. So the internship was in New York. I was living in Chicago, obviously going to school. So I crashed in that summer with a couple other Georgetown grads, and just had such a great summer experience that was able to convince them to come back and work full time. And so, for me, it wasn't even really a question of whether I wanted to. It was more like what kind of opportunities could I do at Pepsi, because the brands themselves were, in my mind, fabulous, because they're all brands, and they're brands that you're bringing home with you. And
by the way, why don't you just let the audience know? They may not know all the brands under Pepsi. If you
so obviously everyone's, I think, familiar with Pepsi, and there's Mountain Dew, Gatorade, and then you've got water brands like Aquafina and Bubbly, and you've got the whole Frito Lay portfolio with Doritos and Cheetos and Roll Gold and Ruffles, and we could go on and on, but it's just amazing brands that literally we have more household penetrations with our Frito Lay brands than toilet paper. Like, that's insane, right? That's crazy when you got upwards of 90 plus penetration with your brands. It just says people care about your brands, they adopt these brands, and they bring them home. So I knew I wanted to work for a place that had these brands that were first and foremost the thing that emphasized the rest of the business, that your brands mattered, and the creative behind those brands mattered. And so that's what compelled me to really pursue a career at Pepsi, for sure.
What was the first job you had there out of business school?
Yeah, so with internships,
and is that a typical job you get right out of business school?
Yeah, with internships, they don't really give you a ton of choice. They kind of say, what needs do we have, as when you're coming back full time. They basically say, okay, if you had a list of 3, what would they be? And they try to match you. And for me, I just said, I don't want to work in the sports marketing department, because I just did that for the last 4.5 years. Right. I'd love to get back to that, but right now I just need more foundational learning. And so they put me on a really small brand called Fruitworks, which was awesome, because there was only me and one other person. And so we just basically had to do a little bit of everything. We had a small budget, but whether it was distribution or innovation or, retail activation, what you name it, it was on us. And so it was a great experience to jump in with. And then you say, okay, well, I've gotten that experience now for a year and a half. What's my next thing that I want to do? Maybe I want to go work in a big brand to be more functionally solid within that. And so this idea of working within a company like Pepsi, which had so many brands, enabled you to have a bunch of different opportunities that you could progress and kind of help guide your career forward. Yeah.
And then obviously you spent most years of your career there thus far with Gatorade. Why don't you
Yeah,
talk,
that's right.
why don't you talk a little bit about sort of how you moved into Gatorade, and then I'd love to talk after that. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about sort of Gatorade's marketing philosophy, which
Yeah, for sure. So I worked out of New York for about 12 years on a bunch of different brands, and everything from what at the time we called our kind of urban lifestyle division, which was how do you take our brands and put them into things like fashion and car culture and music and basketball. And then worked on Pepsi Music for a long time. I worked on Mountain Dew for a long time. And then I had the opportunity to leave New York and move to Chicago to run our Gatorade business, and ended up doing that for about 10 years. And so, yeah, I mean, it was, what I described earlier, which was, hey, I don't want to get into sports marketing. Ideally, I'd get back into that later after I've learned a lot. That's what that job allowed me to jump into, which is kind of getting back to those things that I love, that I grew up with, that I, were inherent in how I thought, and being able to work on a brand like that every day was just such a pleasure.
why don't you, again, for the audience, explain a little bit what, running the Gatorade brands mean, and again, explain too that there's other brands inside Gatorade too, but what does it mean to run a brand? How would you define that or explain?
Yeah. So with this role, I was the previous 12 years at Pepsi were all in what I would say classic brand management, classic marketing roles. With the Gatorade role, it was a GM role, which meant that you still had all the purview over all the marketing of the brand, the innovation for the brand, the R&D, but you also then had kind of functional dotted lines where you would help direct sales, you would help direct supply chain. Ultimately, the buck stops with you. And there's a question about the brand and why it's growing or why it isn't, what your innovation programs look like, who your retail partners are, who your league partnerships are. It all comes back to the GM. And so, in essence, it was about how do you set the right growth strategy for this portfolio of amazing brands? How do we innovate into white spaces? And how are we continuing to make Gatorade not just relevant, but a pure functional part of an athlete journey? And so that was my job, and I absolutely loved it. And you brought up this point of Gatorade is more than Gatorade. You're right. It's if you think about Gatorade, you got G0, which we launched a couple of years ago, G2, which was kind of the half carbohydrate version of Gatorade. But you've also got Gatorade, which we launched just last year. And then you've got Gatorade protein bars, and you've got the kind of whole food side of the athlete fuel solutions. Then you've got Propel, which is our functional electrolyte water brand, and then you've got Muscle Milk and Evolve, which are our protein brands, and kind of the idea of both muscle building and muscle strengthening as part of that kind of 360 surround sound with athlete fuel.
We had an earlier chat, and I was really fascinated to hear about how Gatorade approaches marketing the brand. You guys don't always subscribe to the sort of typical marketing vehicles or philosophy. I'd love to, if you could expand on that a little bit. What are some of the sort of the credo of how you think about marketing?
You're right on it.
Goals in your marketing.
When people think about sports marketing, a lot of times they'll think about when you walk into a stadium and what are you seeing up by the scoreboard and the big signage, and that was not our philosophy. We didn't necessarily need to make an impact on the fan experience. What we wanted to do is make an impact on the athlete experience. And so if you go to Fenway and you watch a Red Sox game, we want to make sure that Gatorade is in the dugout so that at the most important parts of the game, they're fueling with Gatorade, that they're replenishing with our entire portfolio of products. Same thing at the Super Bowl. You very, very rarely see a Gatorade spot at the Super Bowl because you've got, every single break, you've got the trainers running out with Gatorade to refuel the players. You've got the big Gatorade coolers on the sideline. You've got the Gator electrolyte packs that the players will pour in. I mean, heck, you've even got the bath at the end for the winning coach. And so I think the point is our solution to athlete marketing is prove it. So let's get out there. Let's be a part of that functional experience for an athlete, just as much as them putting on their pads or their cleats in a football game. You've got to have the Gatorade there too. And so I'm not trying to tell you, hey, drink Gatorade, athlete. You're watching your favorite players, this aspirational moment as an athlete saying, they're doing it, I need to do it too. And I understand why that connection makes sense. And so it is a different philosophy. What we call is we want to be point of sweat. And that's incredibly important for us as we think about where Gatorade plays a big role with athletics.
And there's one another example that plays into some of this, but is even a little is frankly a little different, which is talk about how you guys came into being involved in what's now called the G League as part of the NBA. Because again, really interesting use of marketing, so to speak.
Gatorade's is the oldest partner with the NBA, and we have a great relationship with that league. And I think the world of the leadership over at the NBA. They're transformational. They're thinking beyond what happens in the next 2 years. They're global in scope, and they're really, really good people. And they came to us and said, hey, we got this property called the D League, and we like it. It's doing well, but we think we could enhance it even more. And would you guys be interested if we called it, like the Gatorade League? And we said, well, we don't do naming rights. It's not something that's in our purview, and
right.
It doesn't get us super excited. But let's talk about what the future of the G League, or the time the D League means, and what kind of opportunity we have to work with those athletes. So think about, you've got the best basketball players in the world. Like, they're literally ready to just join the league at any point, give them a chance to get the call up. These guys are phenomenal. And we would have the opportunity to go in and test these athletes, bring them to our Gatorade Sports Science Institute, work with them on technical advances like sweat patches, like monitors for your bottles, or different innovation that would help specifically for an NBA player, and how they react on court, and what their break time looks like, and thus how we can fuel them appropriately. And having the opportunity to go work with players of that caliber all the time and use it as a testing ground to then bring back to basketball players everywhere, whether that's the next level of the NBA, the WNBA, or high school, or just fifth grade hoops. We can learn so much from that we said, you know what, this is an interesting opportunity, because for us, the G League is less about naming rights, and it's more about a symbol of, this thing is a total proving ground, not just for us, but for all the other partners that get involved in the G League. It becomes this capability to learn from this team of players and help these players get better to make it to that next level. And that's why we got super interested in it, and the league's been just fabulous to work with.
Yeah. That's great. That's really, really interesting. I don't think a lot of people quite understand the derivation of that whole partnership. It's really interesting. So after a very long time with Gatorade, you recently, I believe, moved over to Frito Lay to become the CMO of North America. Why don't you talk a little bit about, what some of your goals are at Frito Lay, and maybe even too, how is the marketing strategy different there than Gatorade, for example?
Yeah, it is a little bit different. And you're right, it's pretty new, about 2 months in to the role, and it's similar to the way that I described, how excited I was to go back to Pepsi once I had my internship. I felt the same way about Frito, because these brands are they're fabulous. They're brands that people not just know, but have a sense of, oh, the last time I had that, or that, I want to bring that with me to a party, because it's so important for me to kind of reflect that about who I am and what I'm bringing, or this kind of getting together. That idea of bringing people together is a really important staple of what we do at Frito Lay. And so I talked about how point of sweat is incredibly important for Gatorade. The fan experience is really important for Frito Lay. And you think about, the last time that you've been at a Super Bowl party that didn't have Tostitos and dip there, or a bowl full of Lay's or Doritos, or you name it, or that gaming experience when Doritos plays a role in how you're snacking late night. So it is really about that accompaniment of kind of bringing joy to those situations. And so it is slightly different. It's functional in a very different way, where Gatorade is functional in how you can act and react and perform as an athlete. this is functional in how it continues to nourish, to bring people together, to add kind of joy to an occasion. I think you asked me the question, what are some of the things that we're focused on? I think a couple things that I'm excited about with these brands that we work with and the team of people at Frito is this idea of continuing to emphasize the food and culinary experience that our products can provide. And so it's interesting that almost half of Americans don't even realize that Frito is made, or that Lay's are made from real potatoes. And so how do we talk about the essence of how our products are made and built and what they represent?
Yeah.
And also how they can then be used and what personalized experiences are like, not just from a flavor perspective, but how things are made and how you then take those and things like Frito pie, which is massive in the South, what you can then do with things like Doritos and Lay's and become part of this culinary experience, I think is really fascinating. And then the other aspect is this whole new emergence of kind of what I'd say is positive options within the snacking category and the food category. Things like chickpea and black bean and all of these different ways to leverage such natural ingredients in a way that actually hits the taste profile that Americans are looking for.
What are some of the challenges today being a leading consumer marketer? I mean, I imagine this whole issue of consumer attention. I mean, there's just a sea of information and coming to each of our way, just an assault every day. And obviously social media has heightened that dramatically. I'm just curious, like how do you compete in today's world? What do you have to do to cut through?
Yeah.
Break through.
Well, I think some of the there's two big things that I'd highlight as far as challenges that we're facing. One is just it's a really interesting supply chain environment out there right now. COVID kind of turned things upside down, and it's still procuring ingredients, procuring packaging, making sure that you've got the right stuff on trucks and it's received at the right time, and there's labor. So it's just the overall scope of
some things you used to probably take for granted.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, of course we're going to get it to the shelf. It's no problem. It's not the same. It's not the case anymore. And so there's that element of having to deal with all of that and rising commodity costs and the value expectation. And so there's just the more holistic business environment, the macro environment in which we're in, that we're working through. But I think, specifically to this other concept of like, what are things that are challenging? I think you're right about this kind of changing media landscape is such an interesting one to navigate. In that, back in the day, it was, okay, well, I'd go to network TV or I'd go to cable TV, or I'd go to live sports, and I'd figure out where my biggest audience opportunity was, and then that's where I'd tell my story. Well, how many people are cord cutters nowadays that don't even have cable? So now you've got these kind of walled environments where you've got the Netflix, the YouTubes, the HBO Max, whatever those ilks, and how do you insert brand messages the right way where people are spending their time?
Yeah.
How do you manipulate the right messaging across multiple screens, because that's the reality of how people are viewing content, and how does that content break through? And to your point, in a sea of content filled in content-filled environments. However, you can also choose to turn those off and filter it off. And so how do you break through in situations that really resonate when you're competing with limited walled garden environments and the ability for a consumer to either fast forward or turn off right from the get-go?
Yeah. How do you, especially the younger people in your team who are less experienced, how do you, I'm curious if you in some ways rely on them more than ever because they're the consumers of these new media, or is it more like, hey guys, let me give you some of the kind of important, some of the important sort of credos we live by here in order to is it always changing, like the strategies you employ? And are you looking at younger people sometimes and saying, help us understand how you think about the media landscape?
Yeah, you're right. I think the younger employees are not necessarily less experienced. It just depends on what you're asking them to do. And a lot of times they're way more experienced than any of the rest of us in terms of how to navigate the social media landscape, the digital landscape, and utilize multi-screen. But So I think there is a lot of learning to be done, and a lot of that is it's really interesting, and something that I've really valued about Frito is a lot of those in-house capabilities and really leveraging the creative firepower of people within the organization that can help create what that communications will be, or what that media plan might drive.
Yep.
So I think certainly media plans, innovation plans, our communication to consumers, they change a lot, but the fundamental essence of what that brand represents shouldn't change, right? Because it's then, how do you continue to grow that meaning in this new landscape, in this new environment, whether it's to a differentiated user base, maybe a younger user base coming up, or talking about what a product may mean to an aging boomer population that is progressing. And so how do we? It's less about massive change all the time, and it's more about how are we refining and tweaking our message to make sure that the essence of what the brands mean continues to resonate with those differentiated consumer populations.
Got it. What do you think are some of the key factors that drive success as a marketer, in your role? Like what are some of the keys that you think that you need to execute on to be good at what you do?
There's this great brand out of Los Angeles called Bricks and Wood, and it's a really small apparel brand. But what I love about Bricks and Wood is they use this slogan that it's the balance between foundation and growth. And to me, I think that's a really good reflection of so much of what we do within the kind of CPG space, is this idea of balancing the foundation, those brands that they're the core of what makes up your business, and then what comes along with it. How do you continue to grow forward, not just with those brands, but also with the brands that may emerge as white space fillers. And so I think it's that understanding that juxtaposition and then how to work within that. And so I think, kind of three areas that I would say are super important. One, understanding data and balancing that with, what your heart's telling you. So you got to be savvy enough to read the data and understand the complexities, but also just have your gut tell you, does this feel right or not? And I think that takes some time, but I do think that's an area that a good marketer can really rely on. I think this idea of balancing the core and innovation, and that's kind of where that Bricks and Wood motto comes from. But this idea of we got to drive the core, and that's where the strength of our business is. Well, we're thinking about innovation and the growth opportunities. And I think the last piece is about understanding this. How do you drive true adoption? And instead of how do you grow users, how are you developing true brand advocates? And what does that mean in terms of them then telling your message to their groups, as opposed to continue to have people use your product? And so I think if, that idea of leading with your gut, marrying the data and your heart, as well as, kind of creating the true brand advocacy and building communities is incredibly important for growth.
That's great. Talk about the importance of collaboration in the world you live in, because right, when you, for example, when you're running Gatorade, you must have to collaborate with so many different divisions. Talk a little bit. Yeah. You can't run this thing in a silo. You have to rely on some other divisions. There's probably some matrix to this, I imagine.
Yeah, there is. I think it's an interesting question around collaboration, because I think there's incredibly important collaboration internally. So all of those functional areas that we talked about, ideally you would have, and what I mean by that is you got finance, and you've got supply chain, and you've got your retail activation team, and you've got your procurement team, as well as your marketing and sale. All of them together. Ideally, you're working in unison, and there's this kind of as an onlooker, it would be great if it was kind of this gray area of who does what, because people are fused together so much with a unified plan that everybody can kind of speak the language of the other function. That's ideal. It doesn't always happen. But I think what's important is just having real good, strong dialogue and having that connection with understanding how all the pieces fit and where other people kind of need to weigh in. And as a marketer, and certainly I think as any part of industry, if you can surround yourself with really, really smart people who are experts in things that you're not so great at, it's going to help you, one, get better, but also help the team and the group that you're leading be that much more effective.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing that I'd say about partnerships is the incredibly important part of partnerships outside of your own team as well, right? So when you think about Gatorade and what kind of partnerships we create partnerships with athletes. We talked about the NBA partnership that we have. We create, with so many of our brands under the Frito Lay, it's how do we create partnerships with differentiated brands that are talking to consumers in a really interesting way, that if we can combine forces and create something that had never that existed before or wouldn't exist if we didn't bring these kind of two interesting groups together or two interesting partnerships together. That's the magic of really working with partners in an effective way. And it's incredibly important for brands to continue to think about that evolution.
Yeah, I get that. If you had to do a little future thinking here in terms of, if you had to think about what are some like 2 or 3 key trends in marketing that if we're going to fast forward 5 years from now, that maybe we're not thinking about as much today that are going to play a key role. It could be a trend. It could be a new platform, a new medium that you think will be important, or it could be a new strategies for marketing. Curious what comes to mind when you think about that.
Yeah, I think the world of COVID has certainly created a lot of change in consumer behavior, and some of it is stuff that existed before, but now we're kind of shining a light on it, and it continues to get bigger. So like the world of kind of omni-channel shopping, and this idea that, the idea of picking up a product at a gas station is the same as going on to Amazon and or to Walmart and picking it up later, or going to like this ease of in and out of all different retail experiences in which we as consumers have. We got to think about what product offerings do you need to have in each one of those formats, and how are we effectively managing across channels? I think this idea of kind of home as hub, this concept of not only am I working from home more, but I'm also, I'm probably having more people over now that we're kind of out of COVID. I probably have more family around. I'm more comfortable because I just spent the last 2 years in my house. I want to get out and I want to do all this, but I'm also a lot more comfortable knowing that home is my hub, and I'm I've kind of started to wrap my arms around that. In a
particularly during the work hours now. It's
yeah, you got it. So then what do you do as a product, and how do you get your products into those homes, and what do they mean when you're bringing others in or supplying variety for several different members of the family who are living in and out of the house? So those are certainly some trends that we're keeping our eyes on.
How are you either exploring or starting to think about some of these, the Web3 world and the metaverse and NFTs and AR and VR, and just, there's going to be such an explosion, I think, over the next 5 to 10 years in these new digital technologies. Curious if you're a kind of company that likes to test and play in this space, or are you more of you kind of like wait and see? I'm just curious if you're
yeah, it's a little bit of both depending on the brand. I think Doritos is a lot more active in that space, and
is that right?
Doing test and learns, and we just launched a big thing with online called the Triangle Tracker, and it's this really cool concept with a partnership in Spotify where every time that you want to find triangles and whatnot, there's an opportunity for you to go and kind of experience different parts of Doritos, and so pretty good. But your point on like, what about all these new trends and new things that are popping up? Yeah, I don't want to jump on things right away. I'd love to see them develop a little bit more, and then understand, like, why would our brands play there? What does it do that doesn't exist already? As opposed to just saying, everyone is jumping on this trend, let's go get your brand in there. But I do think some of our brands are way more aggressive than others, and I love the fact that Doritos is kind of pushing some boundaries. Cheetos is also doing some really interesting things as well in that space. And so I think for us, it is test and learn, but it's also getting some of our bigger brands engaged in a way that's truly differentiated. And I think that's, man, this climate is changing so fast. It's working with great partners to help us kind of guide through it and understand what the future holds.
Another obviously emerging trend that's become real now is this whole name, image, and likeness. How does that play into your strategy? Certainly with Gatorade, are you guys now doing deals with high school players and college players? Or
Yeah, we do. Pretty limited. We
has
don't
that
do a lot
opened
of
up a new world for you, or not quite yet?
Yeah, it has. I think it's still a little bit of a Wild West understanding what the parameters are and how to best utilize them. I think
Yeah.
there's from a Gatorade perspective, we managed through the NIL process, at least at early days, with what does signing an athlete at that level, what does it do for Gatorade? What does it signify? And so our first NIL signing was Paige Burkers, and the point with Paige was she was a Gatorade Player of the Year, so we already had a great relationship with her and her family. We knew her work ethic. We knew what she represented from a young female athlete in a really exciting sport. And as we thought about our work with the WNBA and her path up to that, being with her in high school and then all the way up through college was really interesting for us. And so she was also super creative in what she wanted to do with the brand and things that she could give back to younger athletes. And so we love that one. We've done a lot in the HBCU world, and really not just with athletes, but then what does that mean as part of that HBCU athlete experience? And so what role NIL plays there. But to be honest, we've been pretty stingy in our NIL because I think it really it comes back to, is this athlete the right thing for us, as opposed to what kind of NIL deals are we going to do? And if the athlete makes sense and it makes sense from the territory, think about people who are in Arkansas or in different parts of the country where college football is the thing, where NCAA athletics is the thing before anything pro, because they may not have a pro franchise in their area. That's where NIL could have some impact, especially at retail and things like that.
Got it. Well, our time's coming to an end. I'd love to, if you wouldn't mind, finish by asking you what advice you may have for some of our some students who are on the phone, or people early in their career who are looking to build their career. Some of your advice for either breaking in or building a career and whether it be in the consumer packaged good world or sports marketing or sports, just generally speaking, what are some of the advice you'd like to give younger folks?
Yeah, I think some of it is, it's almost like if you think about Batman and his tool belt that he has, how do you build your Batman tool belt? Like when you walk into a job day one, you got nothing on that belt, right? And that's okay. That's cool. Like you got a whole opportunity ahead of you and you're going to bring a whole lot of great things to this role. But start to build that belt. It's less about, oh, the ideal job for me is X. It may be, you know what, the things that I haven't yet done are this, this, and this. So I'm open to any of those because it gives me experience that I can then check that box and say, yeah, I've got experience doing that. Yeah. I got experience in media. I've got experience in direct to consumer. I've got, whatever that is, build that tool belt. And so less important what your day one job is, way more important 10 years later that you look back and say, well, I've got a bunch of different various jobs, whether it's in the same company or in different companies, that allow me to be a heck of a lot more effective in my role and whatever that is. And then I would say, and with that, be open. Like don't dismiss anything out of hand. Be open and understand how it can help you grow based on that. And then, just don't be afraid to bring yourself to work and be who you are. If you're super chatty and super talkative, then find out where at your role you can be that and emphasize that and enjoy that part of you. That old adage of dress like your boss, it doesn't apply anymore, nor does it apply that you have to act like your boss. You act like you. Find those things in those areas where people wrap their arms around that and think that's pretty great, and you're going to flourish. And so I guess that would be it's hard to hear that when you're first getting out, because you're like, well, what are you talking about? Like I have to fit what the company wants me to do. The company wants you to be you and bring you to that company, and that's why they hired you. So don't be afraid.
I'm really glad you brought up the point about be open and look at how you can improve yourself, and less about the what's the title, or, is this how much of the raise I'm going to get from this, which sometimes clouds people. Or like you said, that I always say to you, like that first job, that's just going to get you in the door. Don't be too worked up about if that first job isn't the ideal first job. I mean, you're 22 or 23 and you have, your whole career ahead of you, but get in, show your wares, show what you can do. And then things can really catapult from there, but don't be too caught up in getting that sort of first job that's so perfect and everything has to be aligned exactly you want. And I don't know about you, I've never subscribed to like a 5-year plan. I've never done it because I've always felt like that can limit you. Sounds maybe counterintuitive, but I think it can limit you because you think, oh, if I have to hit this plan, then if I do this, that may deviate from it. Where in fact, that little curve may be the best thing you ever did.
Yeah, that's right on. I couldn't agree more. Yep.
Yeah, good.
Going into a situation and also being aware of how it's making you better is incredibly important, because you may be in situations where it's not, and a company is taking a whole heck of a lot from you, and it's okay to say, I need to make a change, and you haven't derailed your career. Like,
right.
It's okay. Go make a change where people really love what you do, and you'll continue to grow.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Brett, this has been terrific. Being able to speak to, one of the top consumer marketers working for some of the most blue chip brands in the world is really a real pleasure for us. So really appreciate all your insights and your story, and thanks for doing this.
Hey, Rich, thanks for having me on. This is a really cool opportunity, and I love what you've built here. It's so great. So
I appreciate that.
Whatever you need, let me know, but thank you.
All right. And let's see if our Boston Red Sox can do something next year.
Oh my God.
This year's
the
been
farm system's good. We're good.
Farm system's good. We're holding on to that. We're holding on to that.
That's right.
All right.
All right.
Take care, Brett.
Thanks, Rich.
Perfect. Thank you.